Good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining us for our virtual training this evening on Small Group Ministry 101. And we do have a series of presenters as well as organizers who will be assisting with us tonight, who I'd like to introduce now. We have our American Sign Language interpretation, which will be available all night with Christina as well as Catherine. And so I want to thank both of you for being with us. Their interpretation will be available all evening in the presenter area to view their screen. We have two wonderful presenters who I'll introduce later, but we also, behind the scenes, have Mary O'Mara from the Department of Special Needs Ministries and Molly Herrera, Program Director of the Campus and Young Adult Ministry for the Archdiocese. So thanks to everyone for joining us. So as a way of brief introduction, one of the documents in that handout is called Small Groups 101 or SG 101. This is our guide in the Archdiocese of Washington for organizing, planning, and leading a small group in your parish, organization, campus, etc. The document, as well as our trainings tonight and tomorrow, are organized into 4 sections. What are small groups? Planning your small group, hosting your small group, and leading your small group. Our first talk of this evening covers the topics, what are small groups? To understand the basic definition and structure of small groups, as well as their purpose in ministry. And Chris will be breaking this topic open. If you download the booklet, which we'll again email and make available to you, it was also in the email we sent out yesterday if you'd like to revisit that email. It covers these 5 areas of what are small groups. Some basics, the goals, why small groups are important, how they're a tool of evangelization, and some of the specific roles that are part of small group ministry. Chris Wesley is the founder of Marathon Youth Ministry, an organization focused on developing small group leaders. He's also the full-time director of Youth and Young Adult Ministries for St. Joseph's Parish in Cockeysville, Maryland, where he oversees middle school ministry, high school ministry, and parish youth ministry as well. Chris, so happy to have you on with us. I'm going to give you controls here so that you can move us forward and tell us a little bit more about small groups, your experience with them, and how we can continue to make that more present in our ministries.
Thank you very much, Jonathan. I really do appreciate it. Just need to make sure I get the full screen here. Seeing yours. I'm not seeing the slides at this moment. But anyway, as we pop those up, let me just introduce myself. As Jonathan mentioned, I'm a full-time youth and young adult minister up in the Archdiocese of Baltimore. And in addition to that, I'm the founder of Marathon Youth Ministry, and we work with ministry leaders in development of things like small groups, building teams of volunteers, and a variety of other options there. We do individual coaching as well, and so I definitely encourage you to check that out. Even though I currently live in Baltimore, I am originally from New Jersey, and I've also lived in a variety of different places. In fact, as a kid, I grew up mainly overseas, at least for the first 10 years of my life. And I don't know how many of you who are watching are not from DC or from the area originally, or maybe you moved around a lot as a kid, but maybe you can relate to my story. But you know, of all the places that I lived, which were Hong Kong, Japan, and New Zealand, the most challenging place to move back to was actually the United States, New Jersey. When I moved back to New Jersey, I was in 5th grade, and you know, that first day of school was really nerve-wracking. And I'll never forget, you know, the first class, just fortunately we had assigned seats, so I didn't have to pick a desk or worried who I was going to sit next to because the teacher had already selected that. But when 12 o'clock rolled around and it was that dreaded lunchtime, I'll never forget standing at the door of the cafeteria with my brown paper bag lunch in hand with a little love note from my mom, right? Because who doesn't know how to embarrass a 5th grader like their mom, right? And looking and scouting for a table that I was going to sit down at. And as I looked around the room, I finally zoned in on two other 5th grade guys, and they looked friendly enough. And so I sat down, and they said, "You're the new kid, right?" I said, yeah, I am. And, you know, I shared a little bit about myself. And then they said, you want to learn something cool? And I said, yeah, sure, why not? You know, because I was just trying to make some friends. And they're like, you ever play a game called Bloody Knuckles before? And I was like, no. And they continued to explain to me that the purpose of this game was to smash your hands against each other until someone's hand started bleeding. And if your hand bled first, then you lost. Let's just say that was the last time I sat down with those students. The next day rolled around and I decided I had to start all over again, looking for a new group of friends to sit with. Fortunately, there was another group, sat down with them. They didn't talk to me about Bloody Knuckles. And actually, long story short, some of those people that I sat down with on the second day of school eventually became some of my closest friends through middle school and high school. And again, if you've ever moved around before, if you've ever been the new person, whether that's at a school or a business or even at church, you know that it can be pretty nerve-wracking if you don't know anyone. What I love about small groups is an opportunity where the big church gets small. In other words, you no longer become just a number. You no longer just become, you know, another warm body that's entering in through the church doors. You are someone who matters because people get to know you by name. And this is essential. This is so important to our faith. And you know, granted, a lot of what I'm going to share is from experience, not just of being a youth minister and young adult minister, but also some of my experience of being in small groups as a married person, as a parent, and even in family groups. So even though some of what I'm going to speak of is going to be from a perspective of a youth minister, it is transferable into some of those other groups. But I want to share with you something that is from a document called Renewing the Vision. Get to the next slide. All right. It says, if parishes are to be worthy of the loyalty and active participation of youth, they will need to become youth-friendly communities in which youth have a conspicuous presence in parish life. These are parish communities that value young people, welcoming them into their midst, listening to them, responding to their needs, supporting them with prayer, time, facilities, and money. These are parish communities that see young people as resources, recognizing and empowering their gifts and talents, giving them meaningful roles in leadership and ministry, and encouraging their contributions. These are parish communities that provide young people with opportunities for intergenerational relationships, developing relationships with adults who serve as role models and mentors. All right, so even though this document was written for youth ministry, it basically sums up that the point of church ministry, if we want to create friendly communities, if we want to welcome people in, if we want to help grow disciples, then it all comes down to relationships. So small groups matter because relationships matter. If you aren't a part of a relational church, then it's gonna, of course, feel like you're, you know, just going through the motions, going through rituals. Small groups matter because, again, it's where the big church can get small. And so when you're thinking about small groups, I want to share with you a couple of principles that I think are huge, especially when it comes to building those groups. And the first principle is that small groups are consistent. All right. I have nothing against events, you know, doing things like Theology on Tap, having cookouts, you know, parish picnics and everything along those lines. They can be a lot of fun. But small groups are different because they're consistent, and that's how relationships begin to grow. And as we see in Paul's letters to the Hebrews, he says, we must consider how to rouse one another to love and good works. We should not stay away from our assembly, as is the custom of some, but encourage one another. And this all the more as you see the day drawing near. What I love about this verse is that what Paul is saying in that second line, we should not stay away from our assembly. So going to church on Sunday and then going home, you know, and then not connecting with the community, I mean, that's okay. I mean, you're getting fed. It's the Eucharist. It's the source and the summit of our faith. but we're called to live that faith out. We're meant to encourage one another. We're meant to love one another. In fact, at the end of Mass every single Sunday, we are commissioned to go out. And so relationships need to be consistent. You know, if I only, I'm married, I've been married for 13 years. I'm sorry, I had to even think about that, but I'm married for 13 years. And if I only talked to my wife once a week, we would have huge marital problems. I know I got to talk to her every single day. I have a 10-year-old son. I have a 7-year-old son. If I only talked to them once a week, there would be huge issues. I need to talk to them every day. And that's because the more I talk to them, the more that I listen to them, the more that I encourage them, and the more that I love them, the more that we grow together. Small groups need to be consistent. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that if you are starting small groups or a part of small groups that they have to meet 52 weeks out of the year. Small groups can take breaks, they can take vacations. But one of the things that I would encourage is that small groups have a rhythm, that they form a rhythm. So some suggestions of what that might look like. Well, you could have small groups, we meet for like 10 weeks straight, take a 3-week break, and then start up again for 10 weeks. They could meet all the way throughout the year and take a little break during Christmas, kind of like schools do, start up again in the new year, and then break for the summer. But the point is to discover your small group's rhythm. And that small group rhythm is all based on the relationships that are forming, on the sustainability of those materials and those resources. But number one, small groups need to be consistent. And that also includes a consistent day and time. Secondly, small group relationships are intentionally formed. You know, you might want to have like a big event and then break into small groups and tell people, hey, pick your group. But then it's all of a sudden like bringing up those bad memories of being on the basketball court or the soccer field where people are picking teams and everything like that. You want your small group relationships intentionally formed, which means you have to create intentional invitations. You have to intentionally invite people to join. You can't just have a sign up on a Sunday night or on your website. You need to extend that invitation. You also, while you might want some mixed groups of, you know, mixed adults or, you know, a high school group or boys and girls or men and women, it's also good to be intentional about that. Because I can tell you, there have been seasons in my life where I've wanted to be in a small group of just men. There have been seasons in my life where I've wanted to be a part of a small group of young adults. And it all depends on what season of life I'm in. But if you don't form those groups intentionally, you know, it's going to be easy where you have like one guy show up in a group, in a women's group, or one older person in a young adult group. And while that older person might be able to hang with young adults, it can sometimes feel awkward. So we need to be intentional about how we form these groups. And then lastly, small groups, they're small. I mean, that's why they're called small groups. What's small? Well, really what I've found, what I've discovered and what we help people do is about 8 to 10 people. And granted, there's different variations on age. If you're working with younger kids, you want 2 leaders. And you can maybe have like a 1 to 6 ratio, so 2 leaders and 12 kids or 10 to 12 kids. Older adults, that's where I think you want to stick around 10 as the sweet spot. But small groups are small because if they become too big, then that's where we lose the intimacy. That's where we lose the personal feeling of that. Now, what happens if a small group is no longer small? That's where you do something that I encourage and call multiply. And that means that if a group gets to be about 15 people, maybe you split up into 2 groups of 7. Maybe you split up into, 3 groups of 5. But basically, when small groups start to grow, they start to lose that intimacy and that personality. So small groups are consistent, small groups are intentionally formed, and small groups are small. Now, what does a healthy small group also look like? Well, a healthy small group is not just intentionally formed, but it has intentional goals. And I think when you're forming small groups, it's important to have goal number 1, a vision in mind. You want to be able to clarify the vision and say, okay, why are these small groups meeting? Because small groups, they could take the form of a Bible study. Small groups could take the form of almost like a book club where you're going through, a certain piece of literature together. Small groups, they could be relational based, they could be prayer based, they could be affinity based. Small groups need to have that vision, and you need to clarify that vision so that someone who's walking in who wants maybe a Bible study walks into a more relational group isn't thrown off by that. So you got to clarify the vision. Goal 2, you have to get to know your audience. You know, who is in your mission field? Who are the people in your mission field? Who are the people that you want to reach for small groups? So if I'm starting a small group for men and everything like that, I want to get to know who are the men in my groups, what are in my community, what are the things that they want to talk about, how do they want to grow, what's the single biggest challenge that they're facing when it comes to getting to know God. The more I get to know my audience, the more I not only know what type of group I'm going to start, but what content we need to cover. A third goal is focus on formation for leaders. Now, it doesn't matter if you're leading if you have leaders of a youth small group, leaders for a young adult small group, leaders for an adult group. Your leaders need formation because they are taking on extra responsibility. Now, that formation isn't just how do small groups work, like where to find content, you know, how to start a discussion, and how to answer questions. Focusing on the formation of leaders also means their spiritual journey, because what they're doing, whether they're aware of it or not, is pouring out their love, their energy, their faith to the members in their small group. And if we as leaders are not filling our leaders up, then they're going to burn out. Then they're going to have a hard time continuing on in their journey. And I'd love to say that I've always been perfect with that, but I realize that, you know, it's important to have formation for leaders. And then lastly, we need to create an evaluation system. So how do we know if small groups are truly healthy? Well, if you're not sure where to start, again, go back to that list that we had before, which is small groups are consistent, small group relationships are intentionally formed, and small groups are small. If your small groups are not meeting consistently, then that's a chance for you as a leader to sit down with those leaders and say, hey, what's going on? Is it a communication error? Is it just because your group is hitting a difficult time? Is something going on in your personal life? Evaluation system also says, like, are we getting the people that who are requesting small groups, or are there people in our parish community, in our organization, who aren't connecting, and we need to reach out to them? And then again, are small groups staying small, or are they starting to get big and just become these like mini churches in a way that are growing up over the place? So again, it's creating an evaluation system where you can look at what a healthy small group looks like. And again, just clarifying that vision for the group, like why are they meeting? What's the purpose of their meeting? But also another thing that I would want to add, and I skipped over, is that you want to give your leaders a vision for their group. All right, and that vision is going to include not only like what they're doing, what they're accomplishing, that they're accompanying people, but also that their small group is meant to grow. That over time, their small group might start with 4 or 5 people, but eventually could become 10, could become 15 people. And if that's the case, then those can grow into 2 new small groups. Give that vision to those leaders, and they'll continue to invest in their members and help that grow. So small groups, they make the big church feel intimate and small. It's where relationships are formed. And if you don't believe me, let me just tell you, when my wife and I got married, we were looking for a small group, and we got into a young couple small group. And during that time, I'll never forget, we felt a little bit awkward about, opening ourselves up. It was the first time my wife and I had done faith sharing together. We had been part of our own groups, but through that time, we really got to know some of the members of those groups. And there were 2 other couples, the Scottas and the Hollerns. And over that time, we got to know them, and they got to know us. Well, so much to the point that when we had our children, Matthew and Benjamin, we asked them to be the godparents of our kids. And we've traveled together through hardships, with the loss of parents, with the changing of jobs, with even moving. We've prayed together, we've stayed connected together. And even though today we don't meet as a small group, we've remained very close, true friends. We're almost family. Now, that's my hope, that's my prayer for you. But again, small groups are not only where the big church gets small, but it's also where big life change happens. because a small group is one that prays together, shares life together, and grows together. Thank you very much, and I guess if people have questions, I'd be more than happy to answer them.
Thanks so much, Chris. Molly, I'm going to invite you to share your microphone and maybe share some of the questions that have come in or things that you want to raise for Chris as well.
Sure. Chris, we've got a number of different ministry leaders on this call, people who work in youth ministry, young adult ministry, women's ministries, family ministries, couples ministries. Can you give some practical tips on how to be intentional in reaching out and inviting people? What does that practically look like at a parish or in a community?
Sure, yeah, so two ways that I've seen, so there's two practical ways. There's one, a large group event, which can be highly effective, but takes a lot of work to get started, right? And that's where you do a pulpit announcement and maybe have tables set up outside the parish where people sign up, or you direct them to go online, right? That's one way. But the most effective way that we've seen small groups grow is through personal invitation. So being intentional of saying, like, instead of maybe you as the leader going out and inviting people and worry about recruiting, share that burden with the other members in your group. So if they have a coworker, a friend, a neighbor, invite them to jump into the small group and give it a try. Like, if by inviting someone into the small group, you're not having them join for the duration of that group, but you're just having them give it a taste, give it a try. And then you as a leader can follow up with them and say, like, how did you like it? Is it something that you enjoyed? And if they say, you know, I'm still interested in a small group, but I'm not sure I connected, that's okay. That's where you want to maybe communicate with another group and say, like, hey, I've got this guy here, I've got this woman here who is looking for a small group. I think they'd be a better fit with you. So it's all about that personal invitation and that personal ask. And again, it's one person at a time growing that group.
That's great. Can you also talk a little bit about what are some of, you also talked in intentionality of small groups being in different kind of phases and transitions in your life. Can you talk about different, I guess, creative small groups that you've been a part of or that you've heard of in your parish or in your ministry time, things that maybe we don't naturally think of? You know, I think a lot of us are thinking about maybe doing you know, a Bible study or a book club. Are there other creative ways that you've heard of small groups coming together?
Yeah, actually, I'm part of a virtual creative small group that started during quarantine, and it's called a movie club, right? We called it a movie club, but it functions like a book club, except every week we watch a movie, right? So your assignment is to go and watch a movie, and then we come back and we discuss that movie. And while the movies could be anything, secular or Christian, it doesn't matter. Me and my co-leader, Bob, we always redirect it to faith, right? And so we pick themes and challenge someone to pick a movie within those themes. And then we spend the week planning and preparing to draw themes from that. And if you're looking at doing a movie club, like a good resource is actually Bishop Barron, right? He's got some reviews on movies and everything like that. And so that's one suggestion. Another group that I was a part of a couple of years ago was Men Who Like Beer, right? And so every week someone was responsible for bringing a 6-pack of their favorite like microbrew or challenge. We had some really good ones, some really bad ones. But that was just more of a way of getting the group to start, because I knew that some guys maybe didn't want to get into a faith sharing group. So we kind of, you could say we kind of tricked them, right? Just like, hey, free beer, you know, but it was a way of getting into that group. But those are probably two of the more unique themed ones. But I've been a part of a family group that includes my kids, a couples group that I mentioned before. As a youth minister, I've led middle school. Middle school is probably the most unique group I've ever been a part of, actually. So 6th grade boys, especially. So, but I don't think I have enough time to break down all the stories there.
That's great. We have some more questions that have come in. Someone has a practical question. How do you go about splitting up a group that has gotten too big? If a group of 15 is flourishing and doing well, should you still intentionally split it up, and how would you do that?
Yeah, so going back to casting the vision of a group, like when you start a group day one, it's important to say to people that one day this group might get too big, or this group might grow stale, right? because after a while, a small group you get so comfortable with one another that you stop challenging. And so if you set that precedent early on, that when you get to that point, it's less of a surprise, right? The second thing is it's going to be emotional, because all of a sudden it's going to feel like you're breaking up with people. But the reality is you're saying it's not that we can't see each other. It's just we're not going to see each other intentionally every single week on this night. But like what I recommend is that you identify someone as a co-leader, someone as a co-leader, early on too, so that when you do split, it's you and that co-leader who are splitting off. And as a part of that split off, you and that co-leader are inviting someone from that current group to be your new co-leaders. And then those groups have sustainable leadership, which is important. And again, they can start inviting new people into those groups. And there was one men's group that I was a part of, and we ran together for 2.5 years, and then we split up. And that group then ran for another 2.5 years and split up again. And then I moved away, and that group is still meeting. All 4 of those groups are still meeting today, and that's because we had that vision, we had that leadership, and we were able to continue to grow.
That's great. We have another kind of practical question. Someone says, I run a young adult men's Bible study, and I'm having trouble casting vision to the guys of the need to invite others to help the group grow. Do you have any suggestions?
Yeah, I mean, it's one of those things where you're going to have people who just love staying connected, and this is where you as a leader, and this, I'm not about ultimatums, but there have been times where I've said to people like, listen, if this group's not willing to invite new people and multiply, then I'm going to love you guys, I'm going to pray for you guys, but I'm also going to step out and start a new group. And so sometimes that's us as a leader needing to step out and form that new group. And again, like when you leave a group or multiply a group, it doesn't mean you can't stop, it doesn't mean you stop talking to them. It just means that you're looking to grow, because another part of small groups, right, again, is it's a part of the church. So it is meant to grow. It is meant to change.
Awesome. We also have another one about the pandemic. What are the challenges of small group in this time of the pandemic, not necessarily being able to get together? Have you seen any things happening, practical suggestions of adapting now that we can't be in person?
Sure. I think if you're going to lead a video virtual small group, you need to incorporate video into it. Doing a book study or things along those lines can get really old, and that's because you need changing screens, right? We know that about webinars. We know that about things that we need that changing screen. So if you lead a young person small group or even an adult small group, one program that I found, at least for young people, that was really effective was Alpha Youth. I led a middle school Alpha Youth group this summer, and what was great is there's stop points, there's video, and things along those lines. I mentioned my movie club, and then I'm part of a family group. And one of the things that I would add is that actually virtual small groups should be shorter in time than in-person small groups, and that's just because our eyes get tired. There's only so much time that you really can spend in front of a screen, especially if you're doing that all day. And so I usually recommend that those groups stay around 45 minutes to an hour with that.
Awesome. Another question about kind of parish life and parish ministries. Our parish has a lot of groups made up of small amounts of people, but they're not small groups or intentional small groups. How do you change recurring group meetings from like a ministry group to really be a small group community?
Leadership. It comes down to leadership, identifying who the leader of that group is and asking them to invest into a vision for that group. For example, our student worship band, right? We have made that into a small group. Before, all they used to do was meet for to rehearse, and then they would perform at our youth nights and everything, right? But then I started to talk to Julie, our band leader, and I said, hey, Julie, would you incorporate, some prayer time, some even scripture study, and it could be based on the songs that you guys are playing, but just to grow together as a group and not just to perform. And so she started to do that, and with that was able to lead the students into more of a small group feel, where actually they picked that band as their small group over their actual small groups that we originally assigned them to. So it really comes down to leadership and how you invest in them and ask them to carry on that vision.
That's great. We have a youth ministry question. Can you offer some suggestions for starting small group youth ministry discussions in a predominantly white and wealthy parish on racial justice issues in today's environment?
Yeah, yes, I can, because I work in a white and wealthy parish, and we've had to discuss that. So, I mean, actually, someone who is in your neck of the woods, Ansel Augustine, Dr. Augustine, he is a resource to reach out to. I don't have anything by his personal cell phone. I don't think I'll give that out tonight. But anyway, he has a wealth of resources and can definitely guide you in that. You could do something like have a watch party where the movie's Just Mercy about Bryan Stevenson, and use that as a catalyst to start, and then have small groups based on that. I believe there's discussions out there as well. There's an organization called the Youth Cartel. It's not Catholic, but they have some small group resources based on race and talking about racism. And Download Youth Ministry .com also has small group materials based on race discussions that would be worth there. But if you're not sure about investing in materials, you know, if you just go to I think Amazon or Netflix, I think Just Mercy's on there, and you could do a watch party and have a discussion with that. And that's something that we did, as well as invited a panel of people from our diocese to talk about it as well.
Awesome. Chris, thank you so much for your time. We're so grateful that you've been able to share some time with us and answer some of these questions, especially with all of your expertise. And I think right now we're going to pass it back off to Jonathan.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Chris.